So, Kal Kadosh, good evening. Tonight we're going to speak about a very interesting topic. It is, if you remember the way that we started off the shiurim, we spoke about the importance of learning about marriage, and we spoke about the needs, the necessities of men and women, the differences between them and what each one needs in order to understand. Because obviously if each one is a machine in its own, so therefore we have to understand how does it work. And therefore, now that we understand how each one works, then we're able to continue with the Shalom Bayit. After that, we spoke about compliments, right? The importance of compliments in marriage. That was shiur number 3. And shiur number 4 was basically the concept of criticism in marriage, which was also very vital, but how to do it and when to do it, so on and so forth. And now what we're going to do is we're going to speak about dialogue, which means dusiach. We're talking about conversation in marriage. What does that mean? We know, and we already spoke about from the beginning, that it's actually a requirement, a prerequisite, that we have to speak with our wives, right? And women need speech. And we spoke about it a little bit about the 10 kabin that came down, the 10 measures that came down to the world, and the women took 9 of speech. And we spoke about the importance of speech and what did we actually explain in that really it meant tefillah, but really there is a concept that we have to connect. So today's shiur is going to focus upon speech. So there are many different ways in order to connect human beings. Some of them are much long-term, some of them are important, but short-term, we know one of the easiest and one of the most vital is dialogue, which means when you speak to someone, that's how you connect. You want to come and you want to form a bond with someone, you want to speak to, so what do? You start speaking back and forth, and you form a bond, you form a friendship, you form what we call the entire concept of speech. Rav Shlomo Wolbe came and he actually wrote in this, and he said like this: the creation of speech was for attachment and closeness, which means is in order to become closer together. So the severity of those that use speech for distancing and separation, for there is no, he says over here, whenever we're talking about, there are going to be 4 different groups which do not receive the Shekhinah. Okay, what does that mean? 4 groups that after 120, they don't receive the Shekhinah. Who are those groups? They are going to be Katletzim, the mockers, Shakranim, the ones that tell lies, right? Katchanafim, the ones that they flattery, and Misaprei Lashon Hara. Now, if you realize, every single one of these 4, everything's speech. Whether it's Lashon Hara, flattery, right? Flattery obviously means in the bad way, that you're flattering somebody when he's doing something wrong. Lashon Hara, you're speaking evil about somebody. Whether you're talking about shakranim, we lie, chas v'shalom, or even let's see, mockery out of someone. All 4 of them have to do with speech. Now why? He says because the human being is a creature of speech. And therefore, the power of speech is so important because it actually distances or it makes a person close. And that's the way that speech is. It either brings a person closer or makes a person further away. So when we're talking about speech, so for example, you could get assistance, help from someone. When you come and you speak to someone, you need help. You express your emotions. So somebody is going to be sad, happy, right? How are you feeling right now? You're down, right? Depressed, whatever the case is, you express your emotions with speech. You give over your wishes. I wish that we could do this, we could do that, different things that we want, or conversations also, we could express ourselves, whether it's going to be our worries. We're worried about the future, about what's going on, about the kids, about anything that you have. And through speech, you could also do negative. Chas v'shalom, you could hurt your partner, right? You could speak bad, and you could also make a binding, which again, in essence, Shlomo Melech, right, in Mishle comes and he says, Chaim, Mavet v'chaim biyad halashon. What does that mean? A person has to understand that Shlomo Melech was trying to tell us that in everything that a person has, it's not only just because a person could come and with the power of speech, you could come and you could kill and say, kill him, right? So therefore, or you could come and say, no, you know what, let him give him long life. No. It's a little bit deeper than that, that in the essence of the speech, we have the power of doing everything with our mouths. Everything that a person does, he does with his mouth. And that's why they say that we become servants right? That the second that we spoke some words, that's it. It's already free, it's in the air. We become now slaves to those words that we just said. And it's very, very important, this concept. Now, why is it so important when we're speaking about speech? Because many times the way that it works is that couples, if they start going on we're going to say on this ride, that there's no speech between them, there's no communication between them, so then what happens? So then little by little the marriage just disintegrates. Now you're going to say, but why? Right? At the end of the day, what was so important of the speech? And the reason why is because that's how they actually pay attention, and they actually are going to evaluate their marriage based on communication. Meaning, if I have an open communication with my spouse and I'm able to speak freely with her, and we're able to speak and speak and speak. So what does that mean? It's a good sign, right? And the same thing is on dating. Many times when a person wants to date, what is the first thing no, it's very awkward. There was too much quiet. And you say to yourself, well, what does that mean? What? Is it a good boy, good girl? What's the problem? But you come and we evaluate according to the speech, according to how we're able to communicate, according to how we're able to. So the same thing happens afterwards. After a person already gets married, the same thing. We don't want all of a sudden a person gets married and all of a sudden they're both sitting at the table, looking at each other, looking at the food, eating, and then looking at each other again. And then, okay, let's just continue. It has to be that there's a form of a communication between them. And that's why it's so important, right, this aspect. Now, when we're speaking about this concept, the rabbis come and they tell us, when we're speaking about how do we speak. So there's going to be two forms of speech. Okay, this is very, very important for all of us to understand. And this is based upon the Maharal Miprag on Pirkei Avot. The Maharal Miprag on Pirkei Avot comes and he says, Shimon beno omer, kol yomai gudalti ben hachachamim v'lo matzati laguf tov ela shetika. What does that mean? I always grew up with the Talmidei Chachamim, but I never found something better than keeping quiet. So some people, they try to be machmirim. They say, Rabbi, I don't talk to my wife. You have to keep quiet. What do you want? But listen to what he says. The Maharal comes and he says, this teaches that when a person is silent, his mind is at work. Meaning he's thinking with his brain. And that's impossible for two alternative things to operate in a man, the mind and the body. Therefore, he comes and he says, if right now he's speaking, and he's not thinking, so obviously not thinking. And if he's thinking, he's not speaking. So what does that mean? So we're going to explain it in the following fashion. There are two different types of speech. When you want to speak in front of somebody very, very important. So what do? You stop and you think before you're going to talk. But many times if I'm in a conversation with a friend, do we think? We don't think, we just talk, right? So therefore, there are two forms of speech. Number one, the fluent, usual speech. So we're talking. I come and I say something. Now, many times, since I'm not actually thinking, I'm not paying attention to what's being said. Now, if I realize that maybe I had to express myself better, I'll add another sentence to express myself better. Now, if I would have thought beforehand, maybe I would have worded it differently. But I wasn't thinking. So we're just talking. Yeah, we just talk and that's it. And it's like a fluent talk. Very, very good. Now, many times though, since we're not actually thinking, we don't realize what we say. Plus, the reader, which means the person that's listening to us, sometimes they hear things according to our expressions that we didn't even say. So for example, your spouse will say, but why did you just say that? And you're saying, I didn't say that. What are you talking about? And you're trying to think in your mind, but I never used those words. But that's how they interpreted it. And the reason why they interpreted it that way is because at the end of the day, the way that you said it, you weren't thinking, so you said something, and then you have to start answering up, or you realize, 1 second, why are they giving me that face? Like, what's happening? Like, what did I just say? So you're going to say another sentence. And then you put your foot in it even more, right? So you say something again, and then, but you're not thinking. So that's the first one. Now, that contradiction, obviously, between the two is obviously, as we already said, because we weren't actually thinking. The second one is calculated speech. Calculated speech means you're preparing for it, which means you come, you sit down, and you think, okay, I'm going to speak. I'm going to say something. How do I say it? What am I saying? And you think it over through beforehand. And that's why the rabbis actually say, the Maharal says, both these different types of speeches are actually a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says that a person should Lolam Yadam Zanav La'arayot V'al Yeh Rosh L'Shualim. A person should always be the tail of the lion and not the head of the fox. Now the question is, what's the connection? So the rabbi says something actually incredible, and listen to this. What's the difference between the lion and the fox? The lion wants his tail to get to his head. What he does is that he brings the tail to the head. Meaning right now he's got his tail at the back of his body. He'll bring his tail towards his head. The fox wants to do the same thing. He'll bring his head towards the tail. So therefore, they always say you should always be the tail of the lion, which means that you're always bringing the tail towards the head, which means the most important part is your head. The most important part is what you're thinking about, and not the other way around, which means that your speech should always go about what your head is saying. Don't run after your words. Try always to think beforehand, and then you're going to speak. And that's why many times a person has to actually weigh it out. Should I say it or should I not say it? Why? Because many times he has to realize what exactly is going on. I'll give you an example, slang. If you already know that your spouse does not like slang, so don't use that way of speech, because obviously by using that way of speech, it's going to become a problem. So now what happens is as follows. There's a beautiful concept which is actually brought down, which is about the distant, when we're going to speak about, a professional listener or not, and we're going to go in as follows. Somebody that wants to give a lecture, right? So many times what we have to focus is we have to make ourselves suitable to listening to. So I'm going to give you an example. Many times the women usually are the ones that give this complaint. They say, my husband doesn't want to talk to me, or he doesn't speak enough to me. So now the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we making ourselves good talkers? Now we'll explain that to do with what we're going to learn from professional speakers. But the way that we're have to actually focus on this is I'll give you an example. Imagine right now I'm going to give a speech. I start speaking. I don't finish my sentences. Now, I'm in the middle of a sentence, and all of a sudden I go to the next topic. What happens? You're always running after me. Why? Because if I don't express myself properly, or I'm going to change topics too quickly, so what happens? You lose me. And then you're always, one second, but you're talking about that? What are you talking about now? And then you're thinking, but how did you get there? What are you talking about now? And you continue going. And it brings fatigue. It brings people. And therefore, what happens is that somebody that's not a professional listener, he won't actually pay attention to this. And therefore, what we're going to actually learn is as follows. When we're going to speak about, for example, elegant, we're going to learn from a person that speaks. Why? If you want to learn how to speak to your spouse, we're going to give you what's called speaking course. A speaking course. We're going to learn. What does that mean? And we'll start like this. When you want to come and you want to speak to someone, you have to choose the best way to speak to them. And that's part of the mitzvah of Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. What does that mean? Listen to Rav Yerucham. Rav Yerucham comes and he says, right? And he says this lashon, and he says like this. Your letter from Erev Shabbat was received today. Apparently, he comes and he says like this. He says, it's too difficult for the writing in the morning. I didn't have the time. Between a person and his friend, there's no worse than the mitzvah ve'etrog, which he says, hitnael lefanav b'mitzvot, which means we know there's a mitzvah to beautify mitzvot. You want to come and buy an etrog, you don't buy a regular etrog. You want the most beautiful etrog. Lulav, etrog, talit, you want the best in all the mitzvot. He comes, if so, when we're talking about even writing a letter, right? You're going to write a letter to someone. You're going to choose the paper, the ink, how you're writing it. And he comes and he says, and that's with everything in life. whether it's going to be in taste, in smell, aroma, pleasure, and especially to do with this friend, everything must be done with a desired intention to think deliberately about your friend and not just the way to get rid of it. Meaning, not to be chovah. Yeah, I did it, and that's it. No. Think it over. How are you doing it? So you want to come and you want to have a nice conversation. So prepare the conversation beforehand. Prepare. What am I going to talk about? What is the best way that they're going to listen to it? How are they going to listen to it? Now, according to Rav Yerucham, it actually comes out incredible, because what a person in essence is actually doing is that how exactly are we going to give speeches? How are we going to make that the person wants to listen to what we are saying? So he comes and he says as follows. I already mentioned to do with the concept of not finishing the sentences, or always jumping from one topic to another, or many times even the level of the content, what's in there. But we're going to explain it as follows. The Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzat, or the Ramchal, he wrote 2 different books to giving speeches. Think about it, the Ramchal, the one that wrote on Kabbalah and he wrote on everything, he wrote 2 books directed at a preacher, somebody that's giving musar to the public, or somebody that's speaking to the public. Now the question we ask ourselves, why was it so important to do that? So the reason why is because he wanted to make sure that if you're going to speak to someone, there's going to be a listener. You don't want to speak and they're going to be on the phone. You don't want to speak and they're going to be bored. You don't want to speak and as if they weren't speaking at all. You want them to listen. So you have to practice it. You have to learn how to do that. It's an art. So therefore they say, right, there's going to be something incredible. And this is actually something very, very important. There are 3 things in speech when you want to sell something. Number 1, the love of the listeners. They like you. Number 2, a smiling expression. When the person comes, how's he giving it? And number 3, the faith that he has in it. Meaning when you come and you see a guy with a lot of self-confidence and he's selling you a product, if you're going to come and you're going to start asking questions and he said, I know, I think so, or yeah, I'm not sure. Right? I remember there was once a doctor, right, that I spoke to. And I went, I think like this. And the other thing, I think like that. And then I think, so you're going to say, there's a doctor or not a doctor? Tell me yes or no. And that's it. If you don't have that confidence, so then I don't have that confidence either. So if you're the one that's giving me that, so how am I going to do that? Right? Imagine you call up your accountant. Can I do this? I'm not really sure. No, but I want to find out. Can I do it or not? Well, I think so, maybe. Or you call up your lawyer. Is it against the law, not against the law? And it's not going to sell. You need something that's going to sell. But you need that they're going to listen to it also. What does that mean? If you go to an audience and they look at you as if to say, okay, fine, we want you to finish already. So therefore, no matter how good of a speech you're going to give, nobody's ever going to listen to you. The exact same thing, and that's what the rabbis are going to actually come and they're going to say, the exact same thing is going to happen when we're speaking about the entire concept of speech as well. Why? When we speak to each other, we just want to get a message across. But the question that public speakers always pay attention to is how to get the message across, not what is the message. Because what is the message is one thing, but then I need, how do I get it to them? What is the best form that I'm going to get it to them? So therefore, let's try to learn from them. So first of all, right, when you want to speak to someone, or you're going to give them a speech, imagine right now I'm going to give you a speech, we're going to be here 3-4 hours. Yeah? Nobody ever told you that, by the way, no? It's a 3-hour shiur. Yeah? You're here until 12. Okay, fine. But 3-4 hours. The first thing that you're going to have to make sure is that the chairs are comfortable. Yeah, you could fall asleep in the chairs. Why? Because if not, after 20 minutes, they're already getting up, they're leaving. So you have to make it comfortable. That's the first thing. Another thing is his dress. Meaning the one that's giving the speech, he doesn't have to be too overdressed, because if not, they're paying attention to his clothes and not to the speech. But at the end of the day, he has to look good. Now, in all these things, we think, okay, Rabbi, it sounds very, very good. We're giving now communication classes or speaking classes or professional, but what does that have to do with what we're actually talking about now? You understand? Like at the end of the day, when we're speaking about, right, the entire concept here, what does that have to do with anything else? And the rabbis actually say it is very, very important. And the reason why it's so important is the exact same thing happens with your spouse. Which means we want to connect, we want to speak. So, rule number one, I want to say something. How am I going to get it across? Am I going to be clear in what am I saying? Or is it that I'm always going to be very vague? So you want to make sure that the way that you're giving it over. Are you going to come? Okay, we're going to speak. So now you come, you're half like this, you're half asleep. No, let's get it over with. Obviously, nobody wants to talk because you don't have the level of the listeners. They want to listen. If you're going to show that you have to go in 5 minutes, it's not going to work. So all these things that we mentioned until now of speech has to do the same thing. The same rule will apply with fatigue. So we're going to speak about later on. For example, somebody just, they came back home. So if you're going to attack them, right? Let's talk. The first answer is, give me some time to breathe. Why? Because they've got too much going on in their heads. They're not ready for it. So therefore, you have to make sure everyone's calm, everyone's eaten, everyone's all ready. And now we could talk. Now we mean business. And that's how we're going to actually start with the way that it is. So now, the way that we spoke about before, and this was already in one of the first shiurim, if you remember, we mentioned, what was the difference between the man and the female to do with speech? You remember what was the difference between a man when he speaks and a woman when he speaks? What do men speak? Why do they speak? And why do women speak? Remember, this was I think it was the first shiur.
I think she was more like relating her experience or something like that.
To feel connected and be seen and always be with their spouse, their husband.
Very good. And men?
For a point, for a reason.
For a point and reason. Very good. Correct? Everyone agrees. Between the husband and the wife, they just completely. Okay. Yeah, I finished the shiur. Yeah? Okay, very good. So what happens then? The rabbis come and they say, this is actually going to be a very big problem. Why? If we just said that a man speaks just to get something, what he needs something, he's going to speak. He doesn't need something, he's not going to speak. And the woman needs to connect. So many times the woman's going to say, why don't you talk to me anymore? So again, this was a thing that we said, what are you talking about? We just spoke, I just spoke to you. We were speaking the entire day. Well, we're not speaking, what do we mean? We're talking. We're not beroges that we don't speak to each other, we're speaking. So she goes, when was the last time we spoke? He said, I just spoke to you 20 minutes ago. He says, when? He says, yeah, I asked you where's the shoes of, whatever it is, David, and what happened with the dental appointment with the other one, and this one. I say, yeah, but you see, you just proved the point. You're not speaking to me. He says, but I just spoke to you. So no, you're not speaking to me. So now what exactly was going on? The connection. Now, why did Hashem make this? So if you remember, I think I mentioned this also at the beginning, that Rav Zamir Cohen said that HaKadosh Baruch Hu came and he put it as a miracle, right? Why was it a miracle? Because imagine right now, right, you have a child that's growing up with no speech. If a child is going to grow up with no speech, he's not going to learn how to speak, right? There are certain children, there's nobody to talk to them. So what happens? Nothing. So men by nature, if he's going to have a baby there and he's going to give him to eat, what is open your mouth, I want to shove it in, and that's it. You want to give the baby to eat, that's it. The woman, she's Kuchi, how's this? Look how yummy it is. And you start speaking, and you continue going. You start teaching them the power of speech. And that's how they grow, and that's how they're actually going to materialize. They're going to become better. Therefore, parents, it says, they actually are advised to teach to the children. So for example, you're going to get them dressed. Let me see your right hand. Let's see the left hand. Look what you're putting on. It's so nice, the sleeve. And they start speaking to their children. By doing that, you're actually helping them to grow. When they ask questions later on, it's not just yes and no. You want to develop it. But that again, that's by nature. Women do that and not men. Because men would just be, cut to the chase. Yes, no, that's it. A woman, no, but why and where and how and the other, million one questions. And then you have to find out but that's how they're going to grow. So now when we actually come this, we understand the Pshat and Rashi, that Rashi comes and he says, what was Miriam's name? Miriam's name was Pua. Why was she called Pua? Because she was cooing, she was crying, appeasing the crying of a baby. Why was that her name? because that's what a woman does. A woman comes and she's going to appease the baby, right? A father will come to put the pacifier, put the chuponin in the mouth, keep the child quiet. That's it. I just need peace and quiet. The mother wants to sing to the baby. The mother wants to come and calm the baby down to make sure that it's going, and he'll talk to the baby. A father will not usually come and start talking to the baby. Right? The father will come and say, okay, fine, he'll speak out loud, as they say. So, okay, I think he needs to eat, or she needs to eat, and then that's it, and let's get it done, and let's continue going. Now, according to that, it comes out that, as we already mentioned before, women then need to feel that it's always going to be a connection, right, between them. So there was actually a story with a couple that, again, he was saying it was very, very difficult for them to speak. So what happened was the husband comes home and she says, okay, let's speak. She says, do me a favor. I had a tough night, it was terrible. Let me go to sleep for an hour, wake me up, and then we'll talk. All of a sudden he comes, he wakes up, it's already 12 o'clock at night. And obviously she wants to go to sleep. So he comes, he says, why didn't you wake me up? He says, what? I'm going to wake you up so that way you could speak to me. Like I have to do you the favor for you to speak to me. You didn't want, that's it. He says, no, but at the end of the day, I wanted to speak to you. But you should have just woken me up. So again, obviously, a woman has to understand that a man doesn't feel that importance. And therefore she has to understand that for her, we're going to say her measure and how the marriage is he talking to me? For the man, that's not the measure. So she has to understand that it's not something of a negative that, look at this guy, he just doesn't want to talk to me, he doesn't care about me. It's just that's the way that men are, and therefore she has to understand that. Now we obviously have to understand the other ways around. So we could actually see it many times, right, that the husband does actually come and he speaks to her and everything, but she just doesn't feel that it's the same thing. And many times she feels, sometimes it could even happen, that she'll come and she says, he's not speaking to me anymore. And he says, what's the reason why? She doesn't agree. Meaning, if he doesn't agree with her, it could be that they spoke for hours, and if they're not on the same page, they didn't speak. And you're like, but we were just speaking for the past hour. But sometimes, again, for a woman, she feels that we have to be connected. So being connected means we're on the same page. So if you had a conversation, and you actually spoke, and it's not, you come, listen, Rabbi, I spoke for an hour and a half with her. And as if that I didn't say anything. As if that we didn't talk. Right? What's going on? The answer is because if you didn't agree, it means that there's a problem. Right? It means that you didn't connect. So therefore, it doesn't mean that we have to agree in everything, right? Even though they usually say that, who has the last word in the house? No? Who has it? No, you never heard of it?
The wife.
The wife?
Is it?
No, for sure it's the man. You didn't know it? It's not because I'm Moroccan. No, you never heard of it? I'm shocked. The man always has the last word in the house. What is it?
Is that true?
I'm sorry.
Almost. You're very close. Huh? Yes, my darling. He always has the last word in the house. Always. Huh? Always. But that's an old joke. I thought for sure you knew that. Yeah? Huh? You thought it was I'm sorry. You're always getting sorry involved. No. Yes, my darling. He always has the last word. But I don't say that. But what it does mean though is that many times she could feel that if there's no, at the end, they didn't get to a concrete conclusion, it's as if that they didn't talk. And therefore it's going to be obviously very, very problematic. Now, how far do we see that speech is important? There's an incredible Gemara that says, Rav Bruna says in the name of Rav, anybody that sleeps in a place where there's a couple that's sleeping there, it's written as if to say that he took away, right, the husband and the wife's pleasure. The Maharsha says, because when there's people around, so what happens? So he says, they're afraid to talk to each other. By the way, that's also one of the reasons why we're going to speak about later on, you should never force speech upon your spouse. What does that mean? Sometimes you go to a certain place, right? It could be a restaurant. I'll give the best example, a restaurant. And what happens is, you're in a restaurant. Now, technically speaking, if you go out with your wife, you want to speak with her. Now, you don't realize you're at a restaurant. There's another four or five tables around you. And many times they're all listening in. So, you're coming and you're speaking to someone and there's that's why they exist in certain restaurants. I want a private corner. Within a private corner, I want far away from everybody. I don't want everyone else to come into, and to start listening in, right? So what happens? You don't feel comfortable speaking. Why? If there's somebody there, so you don't feel comfortable. So in such a scenario, right, that might be a reason, and that's why you have to pay attention, that sometimes you have to think, 1 second, is there a reason why they're not comfortable speaking? And that could be many times. It could be on anything. So therefore, a person has to have that in mind. Again, just like what we spoke about the one that's giving the discourse, the one that's giving the shiur, he has to have in mind, where's the best setting to give it? Because if you're going to give it in a setting that always people are coming in and out, nobody's paying attention. So if nobody's paying attention, the same thing. You don't want to come and give it, right? Or you don't want to come and take your husband or take your wife to a place, okay, we're talking, that every 2 seconds people are coming in and out. Because if not, they're all paying attention to what's going in and out, and they're not paying attention to each other. The entire purpose was dialogue between them, conversation between them, not between and not being distracted. So the more distractions, obviously, the worse that it's going to become. The rabbis come and they say another thing which is very, very important, which is basically like this. We mentioned already 100 times, the woman's always going to come and she's going to say, my husband doesn't speak to me. So he comes and says, listen, a guy could come in, or even if he does speak to me, it looks like he's like, a demon is coming and forcing him to speak to me. So he looks like he's forced. And the guy could come and say, you know what, listen, he was a loner all his life. Or he was an introvert. He didn't, he doesn't like to speak a lot. He was very, very quiet. So what do you want from me then? What's the problem? And the answer to that is something incredible. Chachamim come and they say that if someone expects something and you don't give it to them, it's not that you just didn't give them chesed. You stole from them. Right? One more time. I'm expecting something and you didn't give it to me. It's not that anymore that it's considered that you stole from them. Where do we have a proof to that? Right? Where do we see such a thing? So there's a few proofs. One proof is a Gemara Masechet Brachot. It says, if an ani, a poor person, says, hi, how you doing? He's a poor person, misken. So he greets you, and you don't answer him. What do you consider? A thief. What did you steal? You stole his words. Why did you steal his words? Because there's nothing else what to steal. But he was expecting, at least give him the time of day, say hello. But since he was a misken, you didn't even pay attention. I'm not even paying attention to the guy. So what happens? You're considered a thief. And therefore the rabbis come and they say that in essence is what Shammai, when he comes and he says, right, that you have to mekabel et kol ha'adam b'sever panim yafot. Rashi comes and he says, right, that's the pshat. And the Chazon Ish also says the same thing. The Chazon Ish says you're obligated min ha-Torah. Listen to the words of the Chazon Ish. He says, Naki yeh lebeto shana achat v'simach et ishto asher lakach. A person just got married. Shana rishona. So he's a first year marriage. He says, what is the simcha? It's her nature to find chen in his eyes. She wants to find favor in his eyes. And to him in her eyes. So he says, once he's married, he should try to show the love and closeness in conversation and that she's desirable. And that don't have a lot of conversation with women. He says, it's not only just to satisfy. It's an obligation. You have to do it. Which means when a man gets married, the woman is always waiting for her husband to speak to her. And therefore, if he's not going to come and he's not going to speak to her, what in essence he's doing is he's stealing from her. It's not that he's just not doing chesed. So a man could say, listen, this is not my nature. What do you want from me? No. It's not an excuse. It's your obligation to actually come and to actually speak. So therefore, he comes and he says it's very, very important. And sometimes it increases when she sees that he's going to speak to somebody else. What does that mean? Imagine right now, right, this actually happened. A woman comes to the rabbi, says, okay, no, she never speaks to him. Okay, what does that mean? He says, no, what happened is that my husband came home after the thing. I didn't even need to speak to him. But all of a sudden he came home, he picked up the phone, and he started speaking, right, to somebody else. It could be a sister, it could be an aunt, it could be a mother, it could be anybody, right? If it's the mother, well, right? But okay, he starts speaking to the mother. Now, he's having a conversation for I don't know how long. She gets all upset. I don't understand. What are you talking to your mother? You didn't even come, you didn't even speak to me about anything. What is this? And she gets all, all in a tangent. So what happens? What happens is that beforehand, it was even dormant. It was even sleeping, that she didn't even need to speak to her husband. But the second that she sees that he's all able to speak to somebody else, and by the way, that sometimes even could be a man, it could be a good friend of his. All of a sudden he gets a phone call and he starts speaking, and she's like, I thought that he didn't have time to speak, and all of a sudden now he has time to speak. What's going on exactly? So all of a sudden she'll become upset. So he says that also is based upon the same yesod that we just mentioned, because what we mentioned beforehand of how it is. When we're going to speak about different barriers, what does that mean? So we spoke before, we had to learn how to speak, how to have a conversation. So now we're going to find what stops people from speaking. Meaning these are the excuses that the men are going to give. So we have to understand, why is it that now if a man comes and he says, he doesn't want to speak to his wife, or he doesn't find it in, what exactly is going on? What is it? So on this, obviously the women are going to start learning in order to understand what's going on. So first of all,
Can I just say something?
yes.
Okay. Why do you think that the woman got upset that the man didn't speak to her? Like, why do you think that?
Because she doesn't feel connected.
No. Why did the woman initially get upset?
So at the beginning, she wasn't upset. It was dormant. What does that mean, dormant? So for example, I just actually had a conversation with someone. Oh, okay.
I'm asking, but you didn't really say the answer.
Okay, so say it.
No, I'm asking you.
Okay, basically like this. The woman was waiting for that connection.
Right.
When she sees that he's giving the connection to somebody else, that's when all of a sudden she awakens and she says, 1 second, there's a problem here. I'm missing it. You're supposed to be giving it to me. Why are you giving it to somebody else? And all of a sudden now she says, maybe I thought you were busy, you would give it to me later, but 1 second, I come first. So therefore she becomes upset. Now, it was dormant in the fact that when he came home, she wasn't upset. And even she didn't even need to speak to him at that moment. Maybe she could speak to him later on, it would have been okay. But the second that she saw all of a sudden now she's speaking to somebody else, now that jealousy or whatever you want to call it exactly, it awakens. So I just spoke to somebody who had something very interesting, right? It was something about a business deal. So he comes to me, he goes, I understand what you say, Rabbi. He says, there was a house right beside my house. I wanted to, it was stealing. Should I buy it, not buy it? I didn't really care. The second somebody bought it, I felt, chaval, I didn't buy it. What does that mean? It's dormant. Sometimes you have it inside of you that you want something, but it doesn't really, but the second that somebody else gets it, all of a sudden, I really wanted it. And then it wakens up. And by the way, that happens in everything in life. Right? That happens that it could be that I just don't want this. Right? But all of a sudden somebody, you know what? Now I want it. But you didn't get up and get it. No, but now that somebody else already got it, now I want it. It awakens within you. So I don't know if that answered the question or not, or that you want it or not.
No, it's fine, yeah.
Yeah? Okay,
But
fine.
I think with women in general, they always want to feel like they're a priority.
And that's what we said in the first shiur.
So whether, I don't know, I think they always want to talk.
No. 1 second, 1 second. There's going to be one time that she doesn't need to talk a lot, and I will bring that all. It's probably a miracle, but we'll get to it. Right? 1 second. We'll get to it though. We'll get to it. 1 second.
If he talks
We'll
too
get to
much,
it.
is
Huh?
if he talks too much?
Yes.
Really?
If the husband will talk a lot,
The guy talks too much.
because it actually happened to one of the big rabbanim, that he said that there was a woman that came to him and she said, Rabbi, I don't understand, it's the 21st century, maybe nefchuat yotzrot, you understand? My husband talks all the time, so I don't know what you're talking about, I don't even talk a lot. He said that's exactly why. Because since he's always talking to you, so you don't need that feel, that kilo of the connection. He's already making the connection with you, so you don't need to do anything. Don't worry about it. So I said it's a miracle because it's not
You're
them.
not doing anything, it's like the other person's connecting, so you don't even feel like...
So exactly. So you don't need to express it because it's already been done for you. 100%. That's exactly what
The
it
man
says.
doesn't need that connection.
The man doesn't need that connection, but he doesn't need that feeling. You know, there was a famous joke. I think it was with Aristotle. I don't know if it was Aristotle or with it was with Einstein. That they went and he said, you know, I don't understand. It was Shalom Bayit. Somebody came and he says, you know, I don't understand. My husband never told me that he loves me. He says, what are you talking about? He says, yeah, for the past 50 years. He says, listen, I told you 50 years ago. He says, okay, but you never said it. He says, if I would have changed my mind, I would have told you. You know, it's like, okay, I told you 50 years ago I love you. I still love you. You know, that's it. You know, I don't have to.
What's the connection for a man then?
The connection of a man, the man feels connected when he feels, again, the woman needs a connection. That's what does a man need and what does a woman need? So we said, the woman needed the connection, which means that the conversation. right? Which we're going to speak about a little bit later on also, which is basically what's the difference between a friendship between men and between women. A friendship between men is a man comes with a group, so in order to communicate with them, he has to speak. But he doesn't need to find the group in order to speak. Women need to speak, so they'll find the group in order to speak. It's a medium and it ends in itself. Men, we just need to communicate. So we're in a good group. We want to speak. So okay, so let's speak. We'll enjoy ourselves. Men and women just need to talk because that's their nature. So therefore, their talking is already enough, and that's it. What men need is their kavod. You remember we spoke about that the men need to feel that he's the king, that he's he's everything.
How
And
he feels connected.
exactly, and that's how he feels connected. As long as the wife respects him and he gives him she gives him the good food, the good respect, the good everything, he's the king of the house. He doesn't need anything else. Leave him in his corner and he's fine. But the woman, she needs to talk. So each one needs what they need. And that was going back to the first shiur. What?
That's
Yes.
how men connect?
Because when he feels that the wife appreciates him and she respects him, that's how he says, this is what it is. This is his connection. Right? Again, each one in their own what they need. Okay? Now, why is it so important though to understand what could stop the speech? Very simple. Right? So imagine these different barriers. So one of the barriers is that she comes and she says, one second, why doesn't he want to speak a lot? So one of them is she stops him all the time, right? Or she's going to make comments. So for example, why did you do that? That's a stupidity. You should have done it differently. Or I would have done it differently. So if, let's say, every single time the husband's going to speak to you, and every single time the woman comes and she attacks. So okay, you'll accept it once, accept it twice. What's the next time? He's not going to talk. What's the purpose of talking if you're always going to get attacked? What's the purpose of connecting? So now, when she's going to say, my husband never talks to me. Well, who's the cause? The cause was not the husband. He wants to talk. The problem is, if he always gets a shotgun, he's never going to talk. So therefore, it's going to be one of them. Another barrier is the comments and everything else, masculine and feminine. Right? This once actually happened to me in Venezuela, right? That I went and I spoke. Now, obviously, my Spanish was not perfect, especially the grammar. Right? Imagine now whether you're talking about the grammar of the masculine and feminine. So imagine you come and you start. So it's la, le. Imagine you're coming and you're trying to have a conversation. And obviously, you know yourself that your speech is not perfect. Fine. But every single second word, they're correcting you. So what happens? So you don't want to talk. Because if every other word they're going to correct you, masculine, feminine, so then you're not going to talk. You say the year. 5 years ago. She comes, she said, no, it was 6 years ago. Okay, fine. Keep quiet once. By the way, there were last night in the Irusin, in the thing, there was 150 people. There was 170 people. So what happens? The man gets tired. Why does he get tired? Because if every single thing I'm going to say, you're going to have even if there's no importance to it even. But if there's so those create barriers, which means that they create blocks that all of a sudden, I don't need to talk. Why? I prefer not to, because I just want the peace of mind. Now, again, there's many others as well. Speaking loudly, right? This, by the way, usually happens with the men more than with the women, but sometimes also with the women. Depends on who it is. Sometimes they come and they start speaking very, very loudly. Now, when we were speaking about the professional speakers, right? I don't know if you ever realized, when they come and they prepare a shiur or giving over a sermon, remember that part of their sermon, they cannot speak at the entire time at a loud voice. Because if they're always going to be screaming, what happens? It gives over like tense, like metach, right? And it's not good. So therefore, they have to play with their tone, right? Up, down. They're going to, in the expressions of their faces, with everything that happens. So what happens, right? A police tone, like as if you can't. So if you're going to come and you're going to have that she's always screaming, so you come and say, calm down. Now, she doesn't even realize that she's screaming. But, again, she has to realize with her tone. The same thing with the police tone. Talking quickly, right? If, I know that, I'm sure that, I for sure don't have this problem. I never talk quickly. But if the people that talk quickly, the same thing. Because if you're going, you're not very going to understand. So you have to talk slowly, right? The language spoken is not your mother tongue. That could cause a barrier. Which means that's why it's always very, very good that you speak the same language, because if you are breaking your teeth to have a conversation, you're not enjoying. And remember, the point is to enjoy the conversation. So if you want to enjoy the conversation, try to speak, or even that you try to do that. So for example, if the wife is the one, right, what do you think? Haman was the thing, right? He says, no, kol ish sorer bebeto, he has to speak in his language. But it actually makes sense, because if the woman by nature anyway wants to talk, so therefore if she's going to speak in his mother tongue, right? So therefore that's going to facilitate him talking. But if she's going to say, no, he has to speak in my language, so then now he's breaking his teeth, it's going to cause that he's going to want to speak less, because obviously, again, these are all different barriers. Some of them though, they avoid talking, because once you start them, it's energizer. You start and you never stop. So therefore, some husbands will come and say, listen, Rabbi, I don't want to start talking with my wife, because I know that the second turn it on, it's like you turn on the spout and the water just keeps on running. Like, I don't know how to turn it off. It doesn't turn off. So I just prefer not to talk. It's the same thing. A person obviously has to understand that with teachers and all these things, you can understand that, but with the spouse, right? You don't always have that. Now, many times, right? One of the biggest problems that we have is that we don't understand that we actually do all these things. Meaning, if I would ask all the women in this room, did anything that I say here, does anybody do any of them? The majority will say, we do none of them, right? They were made from heaven, right? Men are, that's what they're going to tell you. But it's not only that, also men, huh? That's not true. So very good. So listen carefully. Even though many times it could be that the men already told the women, listen, put down the tone, don't scream, don't speak so fast, explain. But it's also very, very important also that whenever you can, try to examine what you're doing yourself, and sometimes ask. Not on the spot, obviously, but sometimes you have to ask. What does that mean, ask? Ask, is there anything that we could change in our conversation, in the way that we're speaking, that maybe is mafriya, maybe it bothers? What does that mean? At the end of the day, if you remember when we were speaking about whether it's compliments or also the criticism, as long as it's going to be a constructive criticism, it's good. So if you could enhance the marriage by even, again, it's not that you're going to completely change somebody, but if you could actually help out with understanding that maybe I speak too quickly. So now I'm going to think every single time, okay, you know what? Let me speak slowly. Let me try to calm down. Let me try to, and then hopefully will actually help with the two things between them. There was a story, this is actually a very interesting couple, right? Of a woman that she calls up the rabbi. She's ballistic, the husband never wants to speak to her, nothing. Okay, fine. They come and they go to the rabbi. They go to the rabbi and he says, no, why don't you want to speak? He says, yeah, my wife is right. I don't want to speak. Nothing against her. I just I don't want to talk. So he went and he says, yeah, but I don't understand what's going on exactly. He says, he speaks to his aunt in Israel, and he could speak for hours. They live in Israel. He could speak for hours as if there's nothing. So he went and he started saying, listen, you should know, he starts explaining to the rabbi. And all of a sudden, the rabbi sees that the husband is all of a sudden cringing. He's and he's sinking in his seat. So he right away looks at the wife, and the wife is making this face that she's going to kill him, right? So he turns to her and he stops and he says, what are you doing? So she says, what? I'm not doing anything. He says, did you realize what you just did? She says, no. He says, do you realize what your face is telling? So she said, no, I didn't do anything. He says, what you just did, you're causing him not to speak to you. Now, what was the problem? The problem is, even without realizing it, the fact that when he was speaking, she was already angry and showing it on her face, even though she didn't even realize. It wasn't that she was out to get him. Automatically, she was angry and you could read it on her face. The fact that was happening, he was closing himself in and he didn't want to speak to her. So therefore, obviously, we have to learn. So one of the things that we have to learn is, how are we going to speak in a way that it's comfortable, that it's enjoyable? Because if it's enjoyable speech, so then what's going to happen? We're going to continue talking. Remember that it's always much easier to talk to friends, because since there's nothing in it for them, meaning it's not al cheshbonam, it's not on their, they're not going to lose anything. So therefore, it's always good. Whenever it's to do with a spouse, it's always on my account. So therefore, since it's always on my account, it's like, but why did you do that? Why this? Why that? And all of a sudden, when you're telling something over, you have to be obviously much more careful in what you're telling. Another complaint was that sometimes there's going to be tension in the way that women exaggerate. So this is very, very important in how also they're telling over stories. So for example, she's going to come and she's going to say, I can't with him anymore, or it's completely gone, I lost hope, or the washing machine, or I'm already broken by this washing machine, it always leaves stains, it tears the clothing, or I no longer have strength to endure anymore. So it comes out that sometimes she's saying it in such a negative way, and what he says is, you know what? Kilu, why is she over-exaggerating? Why is she going so far? Now, where do we see this in the Torah, which is something very interesting? The Ramban says, that's what Yaakov Avinu did to Rachel. Rachel comes, and she tells her husband, pray for me, I want children. And if I'm not going to have children, met anochi, I'm already dead. What does he answer? He says, what? Tachat Elokim anochi? Well, I'm God. Pray to God. What are you coming to me for? Pray to God. Why did he answer her like that? So there's truth. The Midrash says, why are you answering somebody that she's hurt so much? The answer is, says Ramban, the fact that she went to such an extreme, and she went and she said, if I don't do that, it's like I'm dead. He went and he answered her strongly, which means that by nature, sometimes the men don't like when they're going to come, they're going to exaggerate too much. Which means don't go over exaggerate and make like a whole big deal when he's going to say it's not a big deal. It's something so small. There's no real problem really. Okay? So again, there was actually another story also with this. This is talking about, there was a guy that he was basically saying that the woman is always, saying a story, so she starts screaming. She starts raising her voice. So she comes in and says, what are you talking about exactly? He says, I don't want to talk to her anymore. But again, obviously, it depends on the circumstances, exactly what's going on. When he says that he's just not listening, it's because he doesn't want. Now, obviously, when you want to speak, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to speak on the same side of the table, not on two extremes. Meaning it's not good to have, because then it's like a distance. So when you just want to speak to someone, what you're supposed to do is try to sit down, one beside each other, and you're speaking to each other, right? One beside each other, not across, because across is too much of a distance. And also, right, you should actually show your interest. What does that mean? This we said already, this was I think in the second shiur, where we spoke about the entire concept of women that are partners, much more than men. Meaning women are much more fitting for marriage more than men. So we said that because even in a shiur, many times, women will nod their heads. Right? When you're speaking to a thing, men will come, they have a blank face, very stoic. Do they agree, not agree, doesn't matter. But women, you know exactly, do they agree or not agree? If you say something, they agree. If they don't say something, you're already, he's rather, you know very, very, you already know from the beginning. So the same thing, what the men have to be very, or also women both, but what it's more for men, is that they have to actually be very encouraging in their words, whether it's very interesting, whether it's, 100%, showing, right, the fact of that you're actually paying attention, not that just it's like, going in one ear and not in the other. Okay, and that's why it's very, very important that every single person has their own reactions in listenings. But when you have a relationship, right, between, let's say, for example, a student and a rabbi, it's very, very difficult to, to tell them, how you're going to react. But when you want somebody to react, and especially it's going to be your spouse, you want that it should be a serious message. You want that it should be that, he's saying a new idea, he's saying something. Show it, express it. Tell them how incredible it is and what exactly what it is, that you're actually coming to bring the point across. Okay. When we're talking about different times, so this is where we're going to speak about the different times of speaking. So we said, rule number 1, right? Never start talking to your husband when he comes home. Right? When he comes home, he's usually exhausted. He has had a long day of work. He's had a lot of things. So it's hello. Make sure you sit him down. You give him to eat. right? He's calm, and after, he's already done that. Many times it happens, especially when the children and everything else. So after the children are already put to sleep, and then afterwards also the same thing is when they're leaving. Because when people are leaving, they're already, in their mind, they're already there. They're already left. And therefore, if you're going to come and start, paying attention and start saying, let's talk, it's not the best time. Obviously, when people are tired, the same thing. Again, these are all just different points of when exactly you're supposed to do it. You should always have, and it's very proper to have fixed times. Why do we say fixed times? Because when you have fixed times, it's actually going to be a few reasons. Number one, if it's a fixed time, she doesn't need the feel that I have to speak to you now. Why? I know that every single night, half an hour before we go to bed, or whenever the time is exactly, you could put a fixed time on the watch, you could do a certain time before or after, whether it's a meal or putting the kids to bed. So if you have a fixed time, it's going to actually do a few things. Number one, it's fixed. Once it's kavua, you're always going to have it. Number two also, it's going to be very, very important because you have the concept of that right now, if something, I don't have the urge, I don't need to do it now. We'll do it later on and we'll speak later on. And that could be whether it's going to be even about, the children or about anything. Whenever you're going to speak, it's also nice that you even bring drinks or something. It should be a light atmosphere. It shouldn't be like a homework. Okay, we have to speak, put on the time watch. Okay, the stopwatch. I got 20 minutes left. I have to burn the time. Okay, yeah, start. And let's continue. It should be that it's something, right? Something nice that it's going to be about. To do with work, right? Obviously, it's not always you're allowed to speak about work. And I'm going to try to actually go a little bit quicker. When we're speaking about the different barriers or certain things also, we have to understand that not always is it the best time to give your advice at the moment. So for example, I'll give you an example. There was a husband and wife, they were both teachers. Yeah, it was only after a few years that the husband never spoke about work with the wife. And the wife didn't understand why. And she thought it was very, very weird. Okay, so we could talk, but he never wanted to speak about work. So why not? So what happened was, after coming to the rabbi and after actually finding out exactly what happened is that she came and she said, listen, right? He asked her, would you give him advice or would you try to correct him? So for example, he would say, okay, this is what happened to me in school today. Yeah, one of the students did this, and right? She goes, of course. So he says, but why did you feel you were able to do that? He says, what? I'm the husband, what? I'm not going to do that. Why wouldn't I do such a thing? Of course I have to. So he says, okay, fine. You're right. You have the zechut, you have the merit to do so, and you're able to do so. And she says, yeah, but I'm a very experienced teacher. I could do. So what's the problem? He says, no, the problem is if you're going to give him the advice right away, he's not going to take it well. So what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to listen. You're supposed to accept everything that he says. And then afterwards, an hour later, you come and you say, by the way, what you told me before, it really was bothering me because I want you to succeed in everything that you do. I think that maybe this is what you should do. Try this out. Maybe this is where you'll succeed. By accepting it at the time, because if he's going to say something and immediately, again, I'm giving you the advice, it's not going to work. Say how good it is. The same thing, by the way, happens with a child. A child went, he didn't study well. He comes home, the teacher went, he embarrassed me in front of the entire class. Why? Because I failed the test. So what's the mother going to do? You see, I told you, you should have studied. Why didn't you study? He skinned the child. You just killed him. What are you supposed to do? Oh, but how did you feel? Wow, that was terrible. I feel so bad for you. An hour later, then you could come, you could say, by the way, I think that we should take it more seriously next time that we speak about studying, but not on the spot. If you're going to do it on the spot, it's not going to be taken well. If it's going to be taken afterwards, so then, and that's what happened. Actually, there was a couple, very interesting. He never wanted to speak about his family. It was off topic. He never wanted, it was certain brothers, never wanted to speak to them, about them. So what happened? The wife, she felt, what is this? Why doesn't he want to speak to me about that? It's what? Open relationship, you have to speak about everything. He never wanted to. He came to the rabbi, he said, the rabbi said, what's the problem exactly? He says, you know what happened? It happened actually a week ago, that I went and I told her something about what happened between me and my brother. And I only told it to her after a week. The first thing that she did was, she screamed at me, why did it take you a week to tell me? Why didn't you tell me right away? You see, I told you and you didn't tell me. I told you what's new, you didn't tell me. So what happened? He never wanted to speak to her about it again. Why? So the rabbi went and he explained to her as follows. If you would have come and said, Kol hakavod, you're speaking to me, right? It's working, perfect, right? It's going to encourage him to speak more about your family. But if you're going to come and cut them off, so then that's it. There's nothing else what to talk about. So obviously, right, when it comes and we're speaking about this, it's going to change the outcome of what a person has. So just a very, very quick summary of what we're speaking about. The importance of speech in marriage is obviously the most important, and especially more by women more than men. But even by men, that's what's going to be the connecting factor of what it is. However, though, we should try to invest. Just like we said about teaching, right? Or about learning how to talk. You have to invest. So too, marriage, you have to invest in marriage. Part of the investing in marriage is try to work upon the communication. Communication is in every aspect in life, not only just in the children and everything else, but a person has to pay attention to that. So when he's actually speaking, give the full attention to the other person and not everything else. So what you do is you close off. You're 100% invested. What are you doing? You're talking. Make it that it's comfortable. Make it that it's light, it's not heavy, that it shouldn't feel intense. Because if it's going to feel tense, nobody's going to want to talk. And obviously, as we already mentioned, only through the speech, when we actually communicate, the communication is one of the most important things in marriage, because once you have the communication in marriage, everything else will also follow suit. Bezat Hashem.